We do our important work in the nonprofit sector, not the not-profit sector. We can show a profit in our work in philanthropy. And when we do have that profit, we can put that money into a savings account. We can call that an endowment. We can fundraise into the endowment. And that is what we are talking about today on the First Day podcast from the Fundraising School. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. My guest today is Karen Houghton. Karen is the CEO of Infinite Giving. She intersects technology, finance, the nonprofit sector, and her work includes providing consulting on endowments. And Karen, thanks so much for being with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thanks, Bill. It's good to be here.
I had the delight of learning from Karen at a conference in Chicago, the Association of Christian Fundraisers, where we both were speaking. And Karen, I just noticed you have such considerable expertise, but also have the gift of translating it for the rest of us. And I guess, one of the first thoughts is technology, finance, nonprofit sector. Help us understand this journey that you've been on that's led you to this point.
It's not a journey that many have traveled, but I have been an executive director of a nonprofit. So I founded a nonprofit, was the executive director, filed for my 501c3, built a board, lived in that scarcity mindset. If you fast forward much later in life, I ended up having a 10-year career in tech and venture capital. And in that world, I ended up also serving on a lot of boards. So I serve on a board of trustees for higher ed, where we have a very small $2 billion endowment, all the way to, a smaller organization where we are working really hard to get our 6-month reserve fund, where we're working with a much smaller organization to even build up a 6-month reserve fund. So in this really interesting world of venture capital and tech and board work and still being, a development officer and an executive director of a nonprofit, it gave me a unique view into how can we approach finances in a way that really helps move these organizations who are doing some of the greatest work in our communities forward faster, and often is giving them permission to talk not just about fundraising money, but how do we manage the money? How are we stewarding it? Where is it going? How do we think about that framework? And endowments are often a piece of that, but it's also just general cash management and budgeting and really traveling the journey from scarcity to a strategy to ultimately, ideally, sustainability.
Yes, and an endowment can help us be sustainable literally until the earth ends. That's the money supposed to stay in there forever, if possible. Karen, help us understand. Let's just start at the very basic level. What is an endowment?
Yes, an endowment is a sum of money put aside that is invested. And the idea is that you're pulling a disbursement from that investment. So you are investing these funds in a way where you can pull a disbursement. Generally means every year, maybe we pull 5% off. And then anything that you have gained in the market since then rolls back into that endowment and it continues to be invested. And that way you're bringing really consistent operational budget or program budget to your organization. So say you have a $10 million endowment. Every year you're going to pull $500,000 off that is coming, that you don't have to fundraise for over and over again, right? It's a gift that's given once that can provide for generations to come for the organization that these generous donors and generous givers love. And the beauty is that it often, if done well and done correctly, it keeps up with inflation. So that $500,000, that 5%, as the original capital continues to grow, the disbursement grows. And that's kind of that key milestone for sustainability and a dream that a lot of nonprofits have of reaching one day.
Karen, is this a legal thing? Do I need to set up a legal organization? What are the technical parts of this? Do I have to create a separate bank account? Again, some of those nuts and bolts. What does that look like if I want to set up an endowment?
There are a lot of right ways to set up an endowment. So just know that maybe some organizations do an LLC, some don't. We love simplicity. And so I love just being like, let's make it as tactical and tangible as possible. What you got to do is you got to take some money, you're going to put it aside and you're going to call it an endowment, and you're going to invest it in the market, and you're going to let it grow. And then eventually, ideally 2 to 3 years, you let it grow, and then you're going to pull that 5% disbursement off. While you're moving the money over and putting it into a brokerage account and doing all of that, you're also going to create some documents around that. Usually there's an endowment agreement, and there's also an investment policy statement that dictates how you all are going to manage those funds. A good advisor who works with nonprofits can open that brokerage account. They can talk you through seeding an endowment, and they can also create the policies that you need. Really, though, from start to finish, in the most simplistic version, you can do this within a week. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. And there's a lot of branches we could take here, Bill, but I think there's different ways that you can set up endowments. And that's where I think there's about 6 different kinds of endowments where you can look at restricted endowments, quasi or board restricted endowments, true endowments, term endowments. So there's a lot of these different structures that you can do. My biggest advice, particularly for small to mid-sized organizations who are thinking about setting these up for the first time, is to go for a quasi endowment, which is also a board restricted endowment. And that way you're creating it. Usually you seed it with some reserve funds that you have on hand, which, as a side note, if you don't have reserve funds, let's not talk about endowments, right? Endowments require that long-term thinking where we're thinking in 10-year cycles. So if you're still in that scarcity mindset, let's focus on getting like a 6-month emergency reserve fund. And then, once you have more than you need on reserves, sometimes then the conversation is, let's seed an endowment. Like, let's start to pursue this path of financial sustainability. But when you are doing that, you are putting that money aside and you're creating a quasi endowment versus if you are waiting and having a donor say, hey, I want to gift you an endowment. If you've already seeded it and you've already done the formation and the documentation around it, you're inviting the donor to give into the endowment that you already have versus setting up multiple separate endowments that are gifted from a donor. So you want to be in charge of your funds and have as much autonomy as you can. So having that donor gift it into an endowment that you've established is ideally a great situation because you can create the terms around it with more flexibility.
And so we've talked about establishing this account. Think of like a savings account with some
Yep.
rules shaped around it.
Yep.
Ideally, we have some money to put in initially. And I can remind our audience that the budgeting process that we teach at the fundraising school in our course, Principles and Techniques of Fundraising, actually teaches you how to raise for a surplus. When I led a nonprofit for 17 years, we used that method. We had a surplus all 17 years. That money led to our endowment because we were showing a profit. So come to the fundraising school, learn how to do that. Glad to have you. And then, Karen, you mentioned the board, that the board can set some rules around this. You're a board member in a lot of different places and have been. The fundraiser might be saying, I'm going to talk to my board, and my board's going to be saying, wait a minute, there's the annual fund. We need to get our bills paid. And now you're telling me you're creating this savings account. What approach can you help our fundraisers have when they want to propose this to the CEO, they want to propose this to the board, that this actually is a good thing, and we can fundraise for our annual fund and still create this endowment at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think generally what we need to do is always connect numbers to our story and our impact. And when we are talking about our more generous givers or our major donors, or those folks who maybe have been giving to us for 20 years, but it's a smaller amount, and when they pass, they have the ability to leave a larger legacy gift. What we have to remind ourselves is that it's not about just sitting on a sum of money. It's about creating consistency for the people that we're serving and for the impact that we're having. And so as long as there is intention around the program and purpose for what we're doing, it's a beautiful story of sustainability and a way that those most generous givers are able to say, hey, they get to choose, right? It's not always up to the nonprofit on how these generous givers want to make this gift. It is they want that impact. They want to make a legacy gift. And so by us just being available and saying yes, right, we're trying to give these donors as many avenues to be generous to our mission and our organization as possible. And so for that board, I think it's telling the story of sustainability, telling a story of consistent service to the people that we're serving and supporting, and also honoring those donors and giving them a pathway to legacy. I have a story of a client that I was talking to the other day, and they had a board like that. And they didn't want to do endowments. They thought they weren't supposed to, that they were too small. That wasn't the right path. Any dollar in has to be a dollar out. So they were in that scarcity mindset. And they had a donor come to them and they offered them $1 million gift, but they wanted it to endow a program. It would have been the biggest gift they'd ever had. And they told that donor no, assuming that the donor would give them the gift anyway, right? They were like, oh, well, we don't really want it. Like, we want the gift. Thank you so much. We've talked to the board and we really want to use it for this program. And here's the impact and here's what you're going to do. What they missed is that the donor wanted a legacy gift. They wanted to know that they would be able to impact this organization past their lifetime. So they said no. Guess what? The donor went and gave it to another organization who honored their wishes. And I think that, especially for our small to mid-sized nonprofits who aren't always considering endowments, that's often what we say. Consider the path of what you're offering to these givers, because otherwise, large organizations stay large, small organizations stay small, because these legacy gifts, if we say no, they're being guided to other organizations. So the more infrastructure you can have in place to meet those donors where they are, the better.
Yeah, Karen, we hear some of those same sad stories when we teach for the fundraising school. And I love how your answer, summarized between organizational sustainability in ways that honor the donors. I know with the endowment that I oversaw, leading a nonprofit organization, we drew out 5% every year right into our operating fund. Talk about, that board who might be concerned about annual fund. The endowment was one of our donors into the annual fund every year. And for our audience, just a very quick word on the math. When you determine how much you want to pull out, you do hear these percentages like 4, 4.5, 5. Those aren't random. The idea behind that is if you're investing consistent with the S&P 500 stock market, which on average goes up 7 or 8% a year on average, well, if you pull out 5 and you pay some bank fees and account for inflation, ideally your endowment never goes under the initial number that you started. That's the goal. Sometimes it will during a recession and so forth. And that's why, again, the endowment literally is supposed to last until the earth ends. Like, it's just always supposed to be there for sustainability reasons. Karen, you mentioned the donor intent as well. You want to point out a lot of times a planned gift will go into this endowment. It's not supposed to be spent right away. It is supposed to be lasting forever. And it also means then we can have more than one endowment, because Karen might donate to fund a certain program with her endowment gift. Bill might want to provide an endowment gift to fund a staff position or some other program. We have to be ready for that if we're going to involve our donors, right?
Absolutely. And I know the U.S. Trust study of high net worth philanthropy gave a stat that said 69% of major donors are more likely to give to nonprofits that demonstrate strong leadership and clear financial strategy. And I think that sustainability piece and the fact that you as an organization, when you start talking about even smaller endowments, it shows that you're thinking long term. It shows like, hey, we're not trying to keep the lights on next month. You're actually investing in a legacy, and we're thinking in 10-year cycles. And endowments are a great way to do that. And quasi endowments and board restricted endowments give you a little bit more flexibility. Sometimes organizations are like, but maybe we don't know exactly what we're going to be doing 50 years from now. That's okay. You can essentially write the policy in a way where you have a little bit of flexibility. And if the organization were to shut down, we can write it in a way that says, hey, as long as this money is used to move the mission of the organization forward, you're able to deploy those funds. So there are, different ways that we try to work with the organizations to honor that long-term sustainability, but give you a little flexibility, especially for the smaller organizations.
Karen, you are such an articulate advocate in favor of endowments. As you know, some well-intended people are critical of
Yeah.
endowments. They're saying, why is this money being put away forever? There are immediate needs now. What would you say, again, to the fundraiser who maybe hears that from their CEO or their board, or perhaps from a donor? Wait, why do you need my gift? Apparently, you have all this money sitting in an endowment. How can you help our fundraisers when they hear that very well-intended constructive criticism that some folks have around endowments?
First, I would say endowments are not for everybody. So even though I'm a proponent for them, I also am aware that they're not for everybody. Like if you're in a scarcity mindset and don't know how you're going to continue your work 3 months or 6 months from now, this is not a conversation you should be having. Doesn't mean you can't be thinking about it and dreaming and visioning, but stay where you are, right? And kind of build that first milestone of sustainability, which is a reserve fund. Because again, it's all about the consistency of the work and getting out of the burnout and the scarcity mindset, because that's exhausting, right? So you need your people to feel cared for. You need the work at hand to move forward. And so as you get into that longer term thinking, I'm a proponent for why not an endowment, right? And it is a mindset shift where you have to go from scarcity to strategy to sustainability. And then again, framework it as, yes, there's work to be done. But what does this do for the donors? What does it do for the most generous givers who want to give legacy gifts, who want to know that there's consistency out there, who allow you to then, you're still fundraising, right? But you're fundraising for new programs or different things versus basic operational, like keep your lights on. So I think that's the framework, is just remembering that it's about consistency and showing up. If we live in that scarcity mindset, what does that do for the people we serve? Or say you launch a program and it's going great, and a year later, you don't have the funds to continue, then you're shutting it down. And then we're grappling with the really hard question of, did we do more harm than good? Whereas when you're launching with long-term vision and sustainability, not only are you attracting bigger donors and legacy gifts and endowment giving, that's also providing greater stability for the mission at hand. And that's a win that most boards should be able to get behind. I think, Bill, actually, I'd be curious what you think, but often I think it comes from a place of fear. Fear that, are they allowed to do this? Should they be doing this? And often that just is a misunderstanding of what they can step into and all the opportunity that has.
There is a lot of myth busting on different topics, and this is one of them, which is why we invited Karen Houghton, the CEO of Infinite Giving, to help demystify endowments. And Karen, thanks so much for being with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast. When this topic comes up from donors, especially, or external stakeholders, you've made the message quite clear. Part of it is the endowment is a sign of stability, and don't folks want to support stable organizations. The other aspect about it, when it's not reserve funds going into the endowment, almost always an endowment gift is the donor's idea, the donor's intent. I can tell you, as I fundraise for the university, we need money now. We're glad to have annual fund money right now, as we also are thrilled to have the endowment gifts that are often driven by the donor who wants their gift to last after they do. And that's kind of the answer. And then the last answer to that critic is, if you want to fund our annual fund, that'd be fantastic, because we still have needs there too. Some donors prefer the endowment. If you don't, we have other ways you can support us. Karen, any final advice for our fundraisers today on this topic?
Yeah, I think there's a beautiful mind shift that can happen when you have to remind yourself that they're not your donors. It's like they are, but they're not, right? We think of it as these are our donors. The reality is these donors, it is their wealth, it is their philanthropy, and they get to choose. They get to choose how they give, when they give and who they want to give to. And so our job often on that other side is like, we have to be ready to receive, right? We have to be ready to tell the story. We have to be able to meet them in whatever tax efficient pathway of giving they want. If they want to leave a legacy gift, then our job is to help them do that as easily as possible. And so what an honor it is for us to be able to partner with them on that journey and make sure that we're not shutting down their vision and dream of how they want their wealth handled. That instead we're able to give that as an opportunity. And endowments are a great way to do that.
Karen, thanks so much for all you're doing to strengthen the philanthropic sector with your unique blend of expertise in technology, finance, and nonprofit leadership, and for sharing all that with us today on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thanks so much, Bill.
And this topic intersects with so many of our courses. Again, our budgeting module and our principles and techniques course can help you plan a budget and fundraise for a budget that results in reserve funds that can lead to an endowment. I'm thinking we talk in our campaigns class. An endowment can be part of your campaign. In fact, if you're building a building, you should have a maintenance endowment of some sort. Someday the roof's going to leak, and you want to have the money right away there to be able to help you. Our planned giving course and our planned giving certificate obviously talk about this topic. These are part of our 27 courses leading to 5 different certificates. We're in person now in nearly a dozen cities across the United States. Near Karen in Atlanta is one of those cities. We also can be online, either in the United States or anywhere across the world. We have custom training, designing curriculum just for your specific needs. We have quarterly webinars and these weekly podcasts and all of our knowledge gathered in our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising. Where do you find this? Online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. Our producers today are Mike Anthony and Jennifer Boffman. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.